On October 7, 2023, a day that will forever be etched in the annals of Israeli history, Hamas launched a surprise attack, leaving a trail of devastation and despair in its wake. In the aftermath of this tragedy, bereaved families, their hearts heavy with grief and anger, converged upon the Knesset, Israel's parliament. Their purpose was clear: to demand answers from their leaders, to seek accountability for the lives lost, and to give voice to their pain. However, their pleas were met with a cold and unyielding response. Security personnel, acting on orders from the government, barred the grieving families from entering the Knesset, preventing them from attending Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to the nation. This act of exclusion ignited a firestorm of protest. The families of those killed or taken hostage during the Hamas attack felt betrayed by their government. They accused the government of failing to protect its citizens and of prioritizing political expediency over their loved ones' lives. The images of their protest, their faces contorted with anguish and frustration, their voices hoarse from crying out for justice, were broadcast around the world, serving as a stark reminder of the human cost of this conflict. Their exclusion from the Knesset, a symbol of Israeli democracy, amplified their sense of abandonment and fueled their determination to uncover the truth. This protest at the Knesset was not merely about access to a building. It was a symbolic clash between the raw, visceral emotions of those directly impacted by the tragedy and the calculated, detached response of the political elite. It laid bare the deep wounds that ran through Israeli society, wounds that had been festering for decades as a result of the ongoing conflict. The protest marked a turning point, a moment when the official narrative of resilience and unity began to crumble under the weight of grief, anger, and a profound sense of betrayal. The protest that erupted at the Knesset that day was a spontaneous outpouring of grief, anger, and frustration. It was a visceral reaction to the government's perceived indifference to the suffering of its citizens. The families, united in their grief and their quest for answers, vowed not to be silenced. Their cries for justice echoed through the halls of the Knesset, demanding a response from those in power. The bereaved families, united in their grief and their quest for answers, demanded a full and transparent investigation into the events leading up to the Hamas attack. They wanted to know why the government, despite having access to intelligence reports, appeared caught off guard. They questioned the adequacy of security measures in place, and sought to understand how Hamas was able to infiltrate Israeli territory with such devastating effectiveness. Their demand for an investigation was not driven by a thirst for vengeance, but by a desperate need for accountability and a hope that lessons could be learned from this tragedy. Central to their demands was a call to examine the government's use of lethal force during the attack and its subsequent response. The families questioned whether the government's actions, particularly its refusal to negotiate with Hamas for the release of hostages, had unnecessarily prolonged the crisis and cost more lives. They argued that the government's hardline stance, its unwavering commitment to a military solution, had come at the expense of innocent lives, both Israeli and Palestinian. They demanded to know why, when faced with the agonizing choice between saving lives and pursuing political objectives, the government seemed to prioritize the latter. Furthermore, the families demanded transparency regarding the government's knowledge of Hamas's intentions prior to the attack. They pointed to reports of intelligence failures and questioned whether the government had ignored or downplayed warning signs. They sought access to classified information, believing that it held the key to understanding the events leading up to the attack and the government's subsequent response. Their quest for transparency stemmed from a deep-seated mistrust of the official narrative, a narrative that they believed was carefully crafted to shield those in power from scrutiny and accountability. The families' demands for an investigation were met with resistance from the Israeli government. Netanyahu, facing mounting pressure from both within his own party and from the opposition, dismissed their calls for accountability as politically motivated attacks. He accused those demanding an investigation of undermining national unity at a time of crisis and of exploiting the tragedy for personal gain. The government's refusal to engage with the families' legitimate concerns only deepened their sense of betrayal and fueled their determination to uncover the truth. Section 3. Netanyahu's Defiance and the Deep State.